Hey everyone, Charlie here. Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to One Cup of Japan. If you're new to the channel, if you're new to the show, One Cup of Japan is a podcast slash video series in which we pour a cup of something delicious to drink and we talk about a given topic on the day. Eventually we'll get back to an old style that we used to have, which was kind of a walk and talk, so I could show you parts of Japan, but as for the time being, we're going to have kind of a sit-down style. Today's drink, before we hop into the topic, is, let's see, Craft Boss coffee. Looks like this. You can find this just about any place in Japan, it seems, at the convenience store, at the supermarket, whatever. And as far as cheap bottled coffee goes, it's pretty good. Kind of a chocolatey thing going on. So that is that. To hop into today's topic, on the last One Cup of Japan video, the video talking about saving money in Japan, I mentioned that I was going to be making another video talking about the JLPT. Now that is still going to happen, and if you're interested in taking part in that video a little bit, you can head over to my Twitter account, which is C Hayward Jr., and take a poll asking how you feel the JLPT, having the JLP certification, has affected your life. That is specifically targeted towards N2 people who have their N2 certification. But if you don't have your N2 and you feel like leaving a comment talking about what it has meant to have other levels of that certification, feel free to, of course, either comment in the comments of this video or head over to Twitter and comment on the poll itself. Now, before we hop into that video next week, which is going to be talking a lot more about the efficacy of taking the JLPT and all their other sort of like testing options, today I wanted to talk about why you should actually study Japanese. Now this is for people who are coming here for a semi-long period of time, a couple months, so if you're doing a work holiday or you're planning to be here for a much longer time. I really want to urge people to actually give studying Japanese a serious try. Before we hop into that though, I do want to point out that this is not at all an effort on my part to sort of judge other people who have not, who can't speak Japanese, no matter how long they've been here. This is just my personal opinion on why I feel like it needs to be a priority for you to come over here. Excuse me, it needs to be a priority for you when you come over here. Right, like I said, for any serious amount of time. So the things I'm going to be talking about today are sort of directly how they impact you. I'm not really going to talk too much about how you're having any ability in Japanese will sort of affect those around you. But seeing as we are selfish beings, I thought it best to focus on the benefits of learning the language as they pertain to yourself, to myself. So to hop into it, the first thing I want to talk about is, well, why I guess I felt the need to make the video. And the need for that, I guess, is that, you know, I'm sure you've heard it from other people before, but I have friends, or at least acquaintances here, who have been here for 5 or 10 years, and they can barely hold their own in a conversation, right? Or, you know, a more extreme example is there are people who struggle with ordering, you know, a sandwich correctly at McDonald's or something like that. It's something you see, right? And to me, it's not a situation I ever want to be in, and I can only imagine how sort of mortifying it is for that person to, you know, not even be able to carry out simple life tasks like that, right? Like asking for a cup of coffee, for God's sake. So, you know, that is something that I always think about when I see it in my friends or my acquaintances, and you know, that's always been kind of motivation for me to stay away from that. So if you're wondering why I feel the need to make the video, if you feel like, well, of course, if you're moving to Japan, you'll learn Japanese, let me tell you, it is not the case 100% of the time. So that being said, let's hop into a couple. I've laid out about 4 or 5 different reasons why I feel like it's really, really important for you to give Japanese study some serious attention. Let's take a sip of the cuppa here and carry on. So I think maybe the most important thing in kind of a professional sense is that speaking Japanese gives you power, right? Now, particularly in the sort of gear up for the 2020 Olympics, it seems like, the need for English teachers, particularly those who are working in the eikaiwa industry, has only increased. And what happens when you have such an interest in work, right? I realize I've been looking at the screen, not at the lens the whole time. I apologize for that. Is that, of course, when you have so many people who are interested in filling a position, right, or filling, a limited number of positions, that means the employer can pick and choose, the cheapest option, the most malleable option, malleable meaning whoever's going to sort of follow their rules to the law, or whatever the case may be. And I think, particularly for me, when I first started out, I felt like I had no power in the situation, whatever, because if I spoke up about something or whatever, that I would basically be replaced by the next pretty young face. The next pretty young face. I was never a pretty young face. What am I talking about? But the fact of the matter is that, particularly if you end up working for a much smaller company, it's not, or for example, a franchise school of a large company that effectively functions like a small company. The fact is, I don't think you are necessarily as replaceable as you would be if you were working in some place like Tokyo or Osaka, where there's a lot, you can be replaced a lot easier, for example. But that being the case, I did find that when I couldn't speak Japanese competently, a lot of decisions were being made for me professionally. Things like working hours, class load, things of that nature, right? To the point where I felt like basically I was just being told, people pointed in a direction, I was basically walking in that direction because I was so terrified of losing my job, basically. But what I began to see, particularly after maybe around the period when I was just before taking the N2 and after I passed the N2, was that my ability to speak Japanese suddenly made me more, I don't know, made me be taken more seriously in some sense. I felt like by the powers that be, right, my bosses and stuff like that. And I was being brought into conversations about time schedules and changes in day schedules and and class load and class not class, excuse me, marketing efforts and stuff like that, right? Where I was being taken into that more simply because I could, I could communicate, and it wasn't such a problem for people to sort of bring me into that situation. And also, I think there is a realization too that, at least here, excuse me, there's something in my mouth. At least here, because it is kind of rare for people to be able to speak Japanese who also speak English, and when I say here, I mean where I live, Fukui, right? The Inaka kind of thing. It is rare for somebody to be able to speak English fluently. Also speak Japanese, not fluently of course, but, well, I guess fluently is fair to say, but not at a native level, right? It's rare here, right? It's rare, and also to have kind of a degree coupled with that kind of thing is something that other companies outside of the eikaiwa in this area, I need to stress that, are looking for. And so in other words, that means that I can be poached, right? Or the potential of my being poached by another company, be it another eikaiwa or something outside of that industry increases. And I felt like there was a very clear recognition of that. And so knowing Japanese, being able to speak Japanese in that sense, gave me power and the ability to make myself a bit more comfortable in my working situation. Now, power does not extend only to, this idea of power, I should say, doesn't extend only to your work situation, but also your ability to do things for yourself, right? Now, to go back to the example I talked about before, people have been here 5 or 10 years, a lot of times those people still have to bring a Japanese friend or a friend who speaks Japanese with them to the bank, to their cell phone company, to the post office, any situation that requires any kind of, even upper basic or intermediate level Japanese, they have to bring somebody with them, right? And that's something that I just never want to do. A, because then I have to work around that person's schedule. B, I find the idea of having to rely on somebody else mortifying. And I don't know if there's a C. But anyway, it's not a great situation, right? And you know, even now where my partner, my fiance is Japanese, and you know, she always offers like, well, why don't I just go with you? It'll probably be easier. And it's true, it probably would be easier, but you know, the amount of independence you gain by being able to do things like that for yourself, right? Or, you know, even just being able to order that sandwich we talked about before by yourself without, like, you know, bothering the store staff or something like that, right? I think is worth all the effort that goes into learning a language. God dang it, this coffee's hitting my bloodstream really quickly. Now the next point I want to make is that, you know, particularly in the world that we live in now, particularly with, you know, it seems like everybody has their own source of information that they think is the best, right? And they're always whispering in your ear like, oh, did you hear so-and-so did this, right? Did you hear what the president said? No, he didn't say that. Yes, he did say that. It's on video, like whatever. Oh, that video was doctored, you know, whatever the case may be, right? Everybody has an agenda when they're talking to you, it seems like. And that's always been the case, right? Of course, because of the way we work and the way we live. But I feel like particularly with, you know, this is nothing new, but particularly in the last 20 years, right, with the rise of things like CNN and Fox News and Breitbart and all that kind of thing, right, the ability for you to get information that's not filtered through something, and therefore your ability to think critically and clearly about something has been severely compromised, I think. And I think one of the things that really frightened me when I moved here was being unable to understand the news. And then, of course, when I began to be able to understand the news, I realized that there was a pattern of bias, right? Which is something else that, you know, again, we've already talked about it. But what I mean is that kind of bias that you will get from, you know, like a big news source is not limited to a big news source, right? It's, people do that all the time. You know, we can't help it. We filter things through our own experience, and you know, and so, for example, if somebody doesn't like the current government in Japan, right, and they're trying to translate a story for you from Japanese into English, or that's been done for you on one of like the English news sources, you can only understand that information as it's given to you in English, right? And so that limits your ability to make your own decisions about what's actually happening and to judge things for yourself. And one thing I can think about, kind of a funny example of this, is that last weekend my friend who lives in Osaka came to Fukui, and it was my friend, my fiance, and myself were all hanging out together. And I was having fun because I was translating, because she doesn't speak English, she doesn't speak Japanese. And, you know, he would say something and I would translate it in such a way to make him sound like kind of a dick. But I made sure in my voice, she knew what I was doing and he knew what I was doing. But that kind of thing can happen without you knowing it, right? Where people can be twisting your words, or making you sound a certain way, or making a story sound a certain way. Either, you know, they could be doing it maliciously, or they could be doing it just unconsciously through those lenses that we talked about. And so knowing Japanese gives you the ability to discern that for yourself, right? To make those decisions for yourself about what's actually happening in the world, what's actually happening, what people are saying about you, what people are saying you're saying to other people, that kind of thing, right? Because I know, for example, like I can tell now where people are, I still get this thing where people try to translate my words, which I don't know why they do it, but actually, for example, if I've said something in English and somebody is because I can't speak English I can't speak Japanese to like the parents of my students, for example, where I'll say something in English and then that will be translated into Japanese, and that's not quite what I've said, and I can understand that, and I'll say, okay, to whoever may be the manager or something, actually that's not quite what I meant, and then she'll be like, oh, okay, and then that problem gets fixed, right? So you're being able to understand things, I guess maybe in a way it goes back to your having power, which we talked about before. The next thing, of course, is that cash money. we talked a little bit about the money situation last time, right, when we were talking about savings in Japan. And I think the average monthly salary for an Eikaiwa teacher, for example, here is about 250,000 yen if you're working full time, and I think that's based on like immigration laws. Like if you're going to be employing somebody or sponsoring their visa or something like that, they have to be making a base of like 250,000 a month or something like that. I'm not 100% sure on that, but and that's fine, you know, that's not a bad salary. Particularly, I think if you're living in a place like Fukui, which we talked about before, has an average salary of like $1,800 a month, right? So that $2,500 a month, of course, is a you know, you'll be living a lot more comfortably than your Japanese peers, for example, probably. But that being said, depending on the lifestyle you want to have, if you want to travel, if you want to have an apartment that isn't a Leo Palace, which even Leo Palaces are stupidly expensive for their size, but whatever. Or, you know, even if you just want to be putting extra money in the bank to plan for things like, you know, marriage, having kids, you know, flying home to America, for example, is $2,000 round trip, for example. So if you want to give yourself some room, right, probably you're going to want to pick up some freelance work or something like that, right? Now, a lot of people go the route of having just private lessons on the side, which are almost universally outlawed by your contract, excuse me. But you know, and of course, if you're gonna go that route, then probably you're not gonna need Japanese. Although private lessons in particular are made much easier if you can speak Japanese, and arranging that whole situation, how much you're gonna get paid, when you're gonna meet, and stuff like that. And it's a lot easier if you speak Japanese, of course. But particularly if you want to do anything that is outside of teaching English, right? And I think that's something you're really going to want to enable yourself to do, particularly after the Olympics end. But if you want to do anything else, or if you want to make some extra money on the side, speaking Japanese in Japan, who'da thunk it, is the best way to go, right? Now, a lot of the way people will go is, of course, translation and stuff like that. Places like Upwork and Gengo, if you can pass the testing system on Gengo and stuff like that to become a translator, that's a really good way to go. And of course that requires actual Japanese knowledge, but you can debate how much. It's a different kind of knowledge, right, to translate than speaking, for example, or something like that. But that's very, very important, right? Particularly if you want to be a translator and you want to actually make money, you need to have actual knowledge of the language. Of course, you could just pick out, you know, you could in theory, I suppose, pick out words one by one and make like a really super rough translation, and probably you could find work doing that, but you're going to get paid a low wage. And also the cost performance of that, right, how much money you're making per hour is going to be really low, because you're going to go super slow if you have to pick out every little word or look up every little grammar point, whatever the case may be, to get a good translation out, to get a passable, I should say, translation out. So but beyond that, right, there are a lot of companies who are looking for people in logistics who can speak Japanese and English, at least. I know a lot of people are looking for people who can speak Japanese, English, and Chinese, you know, and it's made a really big difference for me to have that extra skill, because I can actually put savings away, you know, and probably from month to month I make an extra $700-ish because of the fact that I have built up this ability, right? So I'm always looking at the screen. I need to look at the lens. It's fine for you people listening to the podcast version, but maybe the people who are actually watching the video, though I don't know why you would. It's a little unsettling that I'm looking just above your head the entire time because, well, in fact, there is a ghost behind you in your bedroom or wherever you're watching this. So the money thing, right, is a big deal. Such a stupid sense of humor, I swear to Christ. Alright, last thing I want to talk about is, I think, of course, all these things are key to your success in Japan, right? You're giving yourself power. You're being able to understand the world you live in. And one thing I didn't talk about with the world you live in, right, is when you understand a language, you begin to understand a culture, right? You understand the way things are said, the way things are not said, so things can go more smoothly. right? You control better the amount of money you're going to make. The last thing I think, you know, beyond success, I think is the most important to your long-term happiness if you're going to be living here, and that is the increase in the depth of your relationships you will find if you spend the time to speak Japanese, to learn to speak Japanese proficiently. Now, anecdotally, about, oh God, 3 or 4 years ago now, would have been 4 years ago now, I went to what is now my regular izakaya, right, the one I go to all the time. Maybe I've told this story before, but I met a gentleman there who, you know, had no reason to bother with me, basically, you know, and I didn't think much of the guy at the time. He was, you know, just like anybody else. He was smoking a cigarette, he was having a good time, he was watching TV, he was having some cold beer, you know, and I can't even remember how he started off being friends, being friendly at least with each other, but I think as always probably the master of the izakaya was like, oh, this is Charlie, he's our mascot, basically, was what was said. And you know, long story short, this gentleman and I became friends, quite close friends, and older gentleman. It seemed for a while there all my friends were in their 50s, but but you know, so we would go out drinking, not just that place, but then the master of the izakaya and this guy, we would go out drinking in Fukui City, and we went to a couple festivals and stuff like that together. I met his family, and I can remember one thing that he would say from time to time, you know, was that there's so many things I want to ask you, there's so many things I want to say to you, that kind of thing, right? And because, and you know, likewise, I felt the same, but of course there was that language gap, right, that made it impossible to say everything we wanted to say to each other and ask each other everything, and to know everything we want to know about each other. And unfortunately, that this gentleman passed away, oh God, 2.5 years ago now. God, 2.5 years ago, that's crazy to say. But that's something I really, really regret, particularly because knowing this man ended up having a really profound effect on the rest of my time here so far. As far as, you know, really everything, where I live, who my friends are, who I'm going to marry, like all these kind of things were really kind of affected by this chance meeting with this person. And I really regret that I couldn't ask everything that I wanted to and tell him everything that he wanted to know, and vice versa, that he couldn't ask me the things he wanted to, right? And of course, despite that, like I said, we were close friends, and I, you know, when he passed away, I was invited to the funeral and everything like that, and the family, you know, I've kept ties with them ever since for a variety of reasons, which are, you know, I'm not going to go into in the YouTube space, but I can only imagine how much better friends we would have been had I spent more time at that time instead of just resting on my laurels and being like, well, I know enough, right? Which I think is a problem a lot of people have, is well, I can order that sandwich pretty damn well at McDonald's, and I can get from point A to point B, and I can understand a little bit of what the old lady who talks to me at the train station is saying, so maybe that's good enough, maybe I've done it, right? But it's not the case, I think. It's really not the case. Now, one thing I think you'll hear a lot of people who, particularly people who've been here a long time and they become kind of disenchanted with a place, will say is that there's no such thing as making Japanese friends, right? The idea being that, of course, maybe you'll make some friends, but you're never going to hear from them, right? They're never going to call you. It's something you hear a lot, right? It's like your Japanese friends never think to invite you places. And I think maybe that has been true in the past, right? And certainly there are people who don't really want to see you outside of like your set place, right? They're your izakaya friends, right? You'll talk, you'll shoot the shit, and you'll be like, hey, let's go someplace sometime. And, you know, both of you will come to know that that's nothing, right? It's just you being friendly, and you come to accept the fact that you're only ever going to be friends basically within the four walls of the place you drink. And that's fine. You know, that's no different than any place else, I think. But I think a lot of what people are skipping over when they're complaining about this, what they conceive to be a kind of a cultural quirk or some kind of discrimination or something like that. And sometimes that is the case. I'm not going to say it's not. But is the fact of how much work it is to be your friend. You know, like imagine, for example, that your friend, I don't know, there's something that they do that is really exhausting to you, right? Like, for example, I don't have a good example, but anyway, it makes it really difficult for them to be your friend, right? And I can tell you, I gotta be careful because I'm not actually wearing pants while I'm recording this. I mean, I'm wearing boxers, but I don't want to lift my legs too far is the point. Anyway, but I can tell you that from my experience with, you know, when I've been with friends and I've been doing all the translating and whatever the case may be, that it gets really, really tiring. That's not a complaint, mind you. That's my decision to do that and, you know, and whatever, but you know, you get really tired at the end of a couple days of translating for people or whatever the case may be, and sometimes you just don't want to translate, right? You just want to be in the situation like everybody else, just sort of enjoying it, right? And so you can imagine that there are times when people are like, well, you know, for example, I like Charlie, maybe he's a fun guy, whatever the case may be, but I also I just want to go to the movie, or I just want to go and be able to enjoy conversation with friends without having to, you know, work and translate everything. Because translation is work, man. It's work. And like I said, it's tiring. And what I've found, at least in my personal experience, is that the more I've become competent, right? And I want to say competent. I don't want to say like, you know, Nihongo jouzu desu ne level. Not that level. Right, beyond where people will kind of stop telling you that at a point almost, it seems like. But if you get beyond that point, right, where you're competent, where you can have a nuanced conversation, for example, then I think that sort of that distancing that happens sort of disappears, or at the very least lessens. So that's one thing, right? Is that you'll actually have meaningful conversations, meaningful friendships, I think, if people will want to invite you places because it's not tiring to have you around, right? Like, people, and again, I know there are cases where this is a matter of discrimination and it's a matter of being like, of tokenism too, right? Well, yeah, well, I've got this foreign friend, aren't I cool, kind of thing, like that happens, right? People want to show you off the izakaya kind of thing, but what I wanted to say earlier was that I had a friend in high school, right? And now, you know, he's become a great guy, he's got a family, he's settled down, he's sort of stopped doing his stupid shit, but, you know, I loved the guy like a brother in high school, but the fact is, having him around drove me a little bit crazy because he's just so tiring, right? Just talk the whole time, about stupid shit that didn't matter, and you were just like, okay, well, you know, sometimes you just don't want to invite the guy to go places with you, right? And I don't know if everybody has had that experience, but I feel like that's kind of universal experience. Probably I've been that friend in a situation where people are like, okay, well, Charlie's a little bit too much today, so let's not invite him, right? So that is what it is. And I think that same fatigue that comes from that kind of friendship, for example, comes with having a friend who is effectively illiterate in your world, right? So last thing I want to talk about, though, is still in this realm of relationships, but maybe going back to the story I shared about my friend who passed away, is the depth of your relationships, right? Oh, sorry about that, guys. The video stopped by itself. I found it really difficult for the first couple of years that I was living here to have any kind of profound romantic relationship, I think. And I think part of that was that the people who I was dating, for example, at the time, were people who were speaking a little bit of English, but their English was probably only a little bit better than my Japanese was at the time. And when it's that kind of situation, there's only so much you can talk about, right? Like, there is, of course, a lot of people say, for example, Japanese people don't talk about politics, and they don't talk about sex, and they don't talk about, I'm talking about in relationships, right? People will say that. But what I found is that all those things can actually be talked about as long as you know how to do it, right? And so I think when you're constantly tiptoeing around that minefield because you don't want to say something in the wrong way, or you want to use the right vocabulary, whatever the case may be, right? Like that, of course, is going to sort of limit how deep of conversations you can have with people. And if you're only ever having really sort of like superficial level conversations, right? Like how well can you really come to know a person, I think. And I think one of the great joys of my current relationship has been that finding out both how much we agree with each other on certain political points and lifestyle habits and, you know, philosophy and goals and stuff like that, but also finding out that where we differ, right? You know, and are those differences based on education? Are they based on sort of our software, our culture, that kind of thing? And it's been really, really exciting, right? And I always find it really interesting when people because you'll see this a lot of times, right, in the foreign community. Is people who have these relations with each other, been together for a long time, but they don't really know much about each other, or what they do know about each other is very, very limited. Now you ask, well, how do I know that, right? Well, if you ask friends, it seems sometimes they'll say things like, well, you know, I wish I could ask her X, Y, and Z, or I wish I could ask him X, Y, and Z, and that kind of thing. And the fact is that you could, right? But it's a matter of doing the work, I guess. So, I guess maybe those are the thoughts I wanted to share about why it's really worth your time and effort to seriously study this language, right? Now, as for how you're going to study, like I said, or how you should study, like I said, that's not something we're really going to cover in this video. We're going to talk more about that in the next video when we talk about the JLPT and the business Japanese test and things of that nature. It'd be a little bit more data-based and less anecdotal, less feelings-based. My feelings. But I think that's where we'll end today's video. Let's have our last sips of coffee here. What I'd very much like to hear from you guys about in the comments or on Twitter, again at C Hayward Jr., is what has it meant for you to sort of go from not knowing anything about a language to being able to speak it competently? And that can apply to Japanese, it can apply to English, it can apply to anything, any language, right? In whatever country you've gone to, whatever the case may be. I really want to hear, like, how has your view of that place changed, or how have your relationships changed, or, you know, professional things, whatever the case may be. Really like to hear from you on that. Now, even though we aren't talking about study methods in this video, I would very much like to hear about your study methods for whatever language you're studying in the comments down below, because those are some things that we can talk about in the next video. Related to the next video, one of the things I want to work into that is actual interviews with people who are at different levels of learning Japanese. People who have only gotten their N5, for example, all the way up. I shouldn't say only, I don't mean to disparage you, but people who have their N5 all the way up to N1, I'd like to talk to you. Do kind of a Skype interview and record it and make it part of the next video. So if that's something you're interested in, you can either comment in the comment section below this video, or you can get at me on Twitter, DMs, or just normal tweets as you like. Because I wanna work some other opinions other than my own into that next video, so we can get some more balanced view on whether or not it's actually worth studying for and taking the JLPT. So on that note, let's down this. Well, I'm getting the coffee shakes. Thanks always for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. I want to say thank you again to everybody who watched the last video. Your comments were really, really great. I was really, really happy to see how engaged you guys were with that topic. And I hope this video and the next couple of videos, well, every video does the same for you. So on that note, thanks always for watching. I will see you all next time. Hopefully by the next video I'll figure out to look at the lens and not at the view screen above the lens. And yeah guys, thanks. See you soon. Cheers.